Now, in a bid to get the Ugandan economy moving again after nearly 3 months of lockdown to curb the spread of the coronavirus, the government on the 11th of June presented a budget offering a host of tax waivers and funding for the business community. But who was the biggest loser and gainers in the 12 billion US dollar budget? Arnold Segawa joined us earlier for more.
I think one of the biggest winners could have been the ordinary folk who was feeling the pressure when it comes to just bear the fiscal pressure that was through things like pay as you earn, through some taxes like VAT. Now, some of these were deferred. But I wouldn't say it was much of a massive gain for deferring a tax per se, because if you're only deferring it for 3 months, then it's better if you told me that it was waived. So the pay-as-you-earn, people are paying pay-as-you-earn, people are struggling with things like VAT here and there. They got some reprieve in a way. But it's always good to talk about maybe fiscal budgets of this sort in contrast or in perspective. Take, for instance, just across the border in Kenya, they reduced value-added tax by close to 2 percentage points. That's from like 16% to 14%. And this took effect as before, way before. That was the 1st of April 2020. So by the time Kenya was reading the budget, reforms like these were already in play to try and just rekindle consumption as a whole. Some of the losers, if you have been importing agricultural products, they've taken up the import duty on these. Lots of sin tax. If you're a big fan of your beer, sin taxes on malt beer have gone up. The fuel. Now you're looking at close to 150 Uganda shillings that has been added on each liter of fuel that is actually imported. Now this is, of course, an excise tax, and there's many questions around the repercussions of this vis-a-vis inflation, because let's face it, you need fuel to transport agricultural products and basically just move around.
A lot to unpack there, and I don't think we have enough time. But the minister himself, Machia Kasaija, made a statement that this was a post-COVID-19, this was a budget made before COVID-19 expectations. Now, how many supplementary budgets are we looking at, and in which sectors should we expect to be affected in the coming 8 to 10 months of this fiscal year?
That's a tough one, because this is a country that in a way is synonymous with supplementary budgets, and goes to question how good the Treasury is at planning for the spend or the money that they actually, I don't want to use the word money, but the financing and the funds that do come into the country. So it has become sort of a usual fixture to have supplementary budgets. Now, just earlier on in January, we saw the locusts come in, from the Horn of Africa. That also needed a supplementary budget. Then after that, remember, Uganda is having an election in 2021, which is just a few months from now. The electoral body also came out and said, guys, we don't have enough money for the election. That also warranted another budget. Then COVID-19 hits. Now, that has seen a need for something way bigger than a supplementary budget, because fiscal instruments like fixed income securities, like let's say the Bank of Uganda issuing some more bonds, is not good enough. So you find that at the end of that all, the likes of Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, even South Africa find themselves actually going to Bretton Woods institutions like the IMF. Uganda was lucky; we got 100% of the quarter, which was close to 491.5 million US dollars, which was equivalent of 1.8 trillion Uganda shillings. How soon and how often are we going to be seeing supplementary budgets in the foreseeable future? I would say a whole lot. These are unprecedented times. You do have a pandemic. Consumption is muted. And without a doubt, there has to be a way to actually meet the expenditure vis-a-vis spend. So I do not want to have a lot of conjecture into where and when we will be seeing it, or which sector per se. Definitely, if I was a betting man, I would go with health. Definitely health, because We have not yet seen the peak of the pandemic, or should I say the virus for that matter. And with that kind of understanding, I would say when we do see a peak of the cases, then we would have to actually have another budget come in play.
Arnold, one contentious tax which saw a reduction is over the top tax. And could we say this was because of the numbers of people that fell off that were previously using things like mobile money, people using the internet, that those numbers greatly declined as an effect of the tax? Is the government rethinking that tax?
I would say no. I think the people are. I think Ugandans are very forgetful people, and that was already forgotten. So there was a there was a few scuffles here and there, but as we speak right now, OTT, as it's known here, over the top tax. For some of your viewers who might not understand what it is, this is kind of a tax on top of how much data you buy. Now, having spent time in South Africa, it's actually the opposite. There's a lot of movements that are pushing for cheap and affordable data. Here, you have a government that is saying no. You need to charge more if you're going to be using social media platforms and that kind of thing. And much of this has actually trickled into more tax repercussions for things like mobile money, which are, in sense, enablers. Now, to answer your question, for me, what pains me the most is you're seeing more tax on things like fuel. Fuel, the 150 shilling increment on the excise duty for fuel that was declared is going to be passed on to the consumer. Now, if you are a petrochemical company or you're selling fuel at the pump, all you have to do is top up that 150 and pass it on to Arnold here, who's going to go and buy fuel at the pump. Now, for me, that is something that is very, very scary. One other thing that we didn't see coming is an import duty on agricultural products. Now, this has been increased to 60%. And it just leaves you thinking, or even wondering if we are pushing for more intra-Africa trade